Greetings, welcome to today's FSSC webinar. We've got a great webinar lined up for you here today. One of our regular webinars, we're doing it again live from the studio. Today's topic is supporting CSDDD, social and governance challenges. And we've got a great panel lined up for you today. And first of all, I'm going to introduce Francisco Esteve, our strategic advisor for FSSC 24000. Welcome, Francisco.
Thank you.
Great to see you. And this way I'm looking at Alice Palfrey. Alice Palfrey is our Market Development Manager for FSSC 24000 in the studio with us live as well. Alice, good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Great stuff. And we've also got dialing in today from the UK, from Anthesis, Liudmila Chambers, who's a CSDDD expert. And we'll have a quick hello from you, Liudmila. Great to see you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Brilliant. We're really pleased to have you. Thank you very much for coming. The first thing we're going to do, as always, is have a quick look at some housekeeping and some practicalities. Famous question for webinars is, will I get the content afterwards? And of course, we always share the content. We always really enjoy sharing the content with you. The next point is, you're all muted. You won't be able to ask questions in terms of audio today, but please send us your questions. Every time we run one of these questions, we get lots and lots of questions. We don't always manage to answer all the questions during the webinar, and we always endeavour to wrap the questions up and communicate them back in some other way, shape or form. In fact, sometimes even the questions we do get generate webinars, like today is part of a webinar because of some questions we had at previous webinars. So please keep the questions coming and I'll address those at the end of the webinar. And really, finally, we'd like to let you know that we'd love your full engagement on the webinar today, and we can take all of your questions, like I say, for the audience. We're really lined up for lots of great questions today. Now, let's tell you a little bit about Foundation FSSC. A lot of you today, and there are many people on the webinar today, are very familiar with FSSC already. But many of you will be new to FSSC and you'll be attracted because we're talking about CSDDD today, which is a very important topic, particularly across Europe and around the world right now. So essentially, FSSC have got two main schemes, 22,000 and FSSC 24,000. And really, as you'll see in a couple of slides' time, our ambition is to create a better world through the widespread adoption of our schemes. Our main goal is to support the consumer goods industry to protect their brands and achieve their targets. And by doing this, we talk about using ISO-based management systems. And that really is the topic of today and how one of those can support you on CSDDD. Ultimately, as a not-for-profit foundation based here in the Netherlands with a global footprint, our role is to create a better world and really to provide trust and impact across supply chains. And we do this really through these main areas you can see on the screen here, which is by our schemes and assurance. So FSSC 22,000, FSSC 24,000, our development program and our digital solutions. We also work on capacity building to help organisations really be equipped for the world, for particularly food safety, and also by offering larger organisations the ability to have more visibility across their supply chains. All of those topics are really important today, as you'll see. In terms of our structure, it's very important to note that last year we celebrated our 15th birthday, and with over 37,000 FSSC 22,000 certificates in the world now, across the entire world, we're very well established. As you can see here, there's our structure, and I draw particular attention to you to the right-hand side, which is particular governance arrangements around our schemes and the advisory panels committees for FSSC 22,000 and FSSC 24,000. And today we're going to spotlight FSSC 24,000 by really looking at CSDDD and the impacts on organisations and what they can do to get ready. And with that introduction, I'd now hand you over to Liudmila Chambers at Anthesis Group, who's a CSD expert, who's going to spend the next sort of 15 minutes talking us through CSDDD. Over to you, Liudmila. Thank you, and everybody enjoy the presentation.
Thank you very much, Colin. I'd like to start by giving a brief overview at Anthesis. We are an end-to-end sustainability advisory firm working with companies on a range of their sustainability challenges, whether it is decarbonizing supply chains and operations or embedding human rights best practices into policies and management systems. And we work with companies of all sizes and in all sectors, whether they're only starting on their sustainability journey or have advanced management systems. We partner with them to find tailored solutions for sustainable performance. And now moving on to the core focus of our presentation today, which is CSDDD, obviously. So what I'm going to do over the next 10 to 15 minutes is to walk you through CSDDD applicability criteria. I will then explain some of the core concepts that are fundamental in understanding what CSDDD is, and I will conclude with key requirements for compliance. Let's start with the definition. CSDDD is an EU directive that introduces legal obligations on businesses to conduct human rights and environmental due diligence in their operations, subsidiaries, and throughout their chains of activities. This is quite a long definition, and there are several key concepts here that we're going to look at in more details later on. Chains of activities, due diligence, and what human rights and environmental topics are covered by the CSDDD. This is a directive that went into effect in July last year, and because it is a directive, now member states have 2 years to implement it in the national law. It applies to both EU and non-EU companies, and the applicability thresholds differ depending on whether it is an EU or non-EU company. For EU companies, it is number of employees and a global turnover, and the first wave of EU-based companies is expected to start compliance in 2027. For non-EU companies, it is not the global turnover, but the turnover specifically in the EU market that defines the threshold, and number of employees is not used as a criteria. Similarly, for non-EU companies, the first wave is expected to start compliance in 2027. Note that for non-EU parent companies with EU subsidiaries, for their EU subsidiaries, it is criteria for EU companies that apply. In addition to these criteria, the CSDDD will also apply to EU and non-EU franchises and licenses if they meet certain royalty and turnover thresholds as outlined on this slide. And for them, the compliance period will start in 2029. And now there's a big caveat to all of the information on this slide. Some of you might be following very exciting omnibus discussions at the European Union level. We're not going to go into omnibus into this presentation, but I just wanted to mention that these thresholds and this timeline is very much dependent on the outcomes of the omnibus discussion. So as we said, CSDDD applies to both EU and non-EU companies. If we look at the EU companies first, according to the latest estimates by SOMO, published in the CSDDD Data Hub, approximately 3,400 corporate groups in the EU will be in scope of CSDDD. Most companies in Germany, with over 950, followed by companies in Italy, France, Netherlands, and Spain. For companies outside of the EU, but with operations in the EU, around 880 corporate groups are estimated to be within the scope. Again, this is drawing on the latest research by SOMO. Most companies would come from the US with 315, followed by UK, Switzerland, Japan, and China. Now, as we said at the introduction, there are several fundamental concepts that are important to discuss to get a better understanding of what CSDDD is all about. And the first of them is a chain of activities. It is a brand new term that didn't really exist prior to CSDDD. We're all familiar with supply chains or value chains. This is a new term. It describes companies' own operations and operations of its subsidiaries. It describes the whole of the upstream value chain, or what we traditionally call supply chain. And this includes your tier 1 suppliers, but also way beyond tier 1, all the way to sourcing, extraction, and the supply of raw materials. With regards to downstream, the CSDDD's term chain of activities only covers a very small portion of the downstream, and it is the distribution, transportation, and storage of products. Phases such as use and recycling and disposal of products are at the moment out of scope of chain of activities and therefore out of scope of CSDDD. Moving on to topics covered by CSDDD, it's a wide range of human rights and environmental aspects. Starting with human rights, as you can see, it's traditional labor rights issues that many of you will be very well familiar, such as child labor, enforced labor, but it's also non-labor human rights. For example, right to life, or right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. For environment, it is a catch-all group or bucket of environmental degradation that covers harmful soil change, degradation of land, deforestation, water pollution, water scarcity, amongst other topics. And it's also waste management, biodiversity loss, and climate change. Now, the third key concept is obviously due diligence. The concept of due diligence is not new. It comes from international soft law instruments such as the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, or UNGPs, and the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises. So many, particularly large businesses, are very well familiar with 6 steps due diligence cycle. And for them, CSDDD would be nothing new because it is very well aligned with these 6 steps. The first step is embedding responsible business conduct into policies and management systems. The second step is identifying, assessing, and prioritizing adverse impacts in operations and supply chains, followed by the development of action plans to prevent, mitigate, and bring these impacts to an end. Number 4 is tracking the implementation and results of due diligence processes, followed by communication of how the impacts are addressed. And then for those impacts that have been identified in the second step as actual adverse impacts, companies may need to provide remediation. And now onto the key CSDDD requirements. It's a long text, but all of the requirements can be boiled down to the 9 core requirements around due diligence that are perfectly aligned with the 6-step due diligence cycle introduced by the UNGPs and the OECD guidelines. And standing aside is a new requirement of adopting and implementing transition plans for climate change mitigation. Today we will focus on the middle due diligence portion, so requirements 1 to 9, and I will walk you through each of them. The first requirement is to integrate due diligence into companies' policies and risk management processes. And the requirement is to have a due diligence policy and then build out these due diligence processes in all related policy documents. Number 2 is identifying, assessing, and prioritizing actual and potential adverse impacts on human rights and the environment, covering all of the human rights and environmental topics that we discussed earlier, and looking at the whole chain of activities, so own operations, the whole of the upstream, and a small portion of the downstream value chain. For those impacts that have been identified as potential, companies would need to develop prevention action plans in number 3. For actual impacts, companies in scope will be responsible for bringing them to an end, or when it's not possible to do so immediately, to minimize their extent through the development of corrective action plans. Actual impacts will also need to be remedied in number 5. And closely related to this is stakeholder engagement, which is a big focus of CSDDD, and stakeholder engagement should feed into the process of identifying impacts, assessing and prioritizing them, development of prevention and corrective action plans, and remediation strategies. So basically, number 6, stakeholder engagement, should feed into number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 5. The next requirement is around grievance mechanisms, or in other words, notification mechanisms or complaints procedures that would allow individuals to raise their concerns about environmental and human rights impacts. Number 8 is monitoring through quantitative and qualitative KPIs. And the 9th requirement is to publish an annual statement. So as you can see, these are complex requirements and there are a lot of them, but as I mentioned earlier, they are nothing new. They're very closely aligned with the fundamental principles of due diligence, and many companies will be familiar with those, although it doesn't make it less challenging to implement CSDDD in practice. And with this, I will hand you over back to Colin and Francisco, who will walk you through the practical challenges of implementing CSDDD. Thank you very much. I look forward to our discussion later on.
Thank you, Liudmila. That was an excellent presentation, really, really comprehensive. And we really appreciate you joining us today for that expert guidance on the CSDDD topic. Now, we're here in the studio, and I think there was a few eyes thinking, gosh, if you're an organisation, where do you start with this? Where do you start? There's, even though Liudmila, you said, for many organisations it might be familiar, but for many organisations they've been looking at this perhaps terrified. Where do they start? Where do they go with all this implementation? So on my left here, we've got Francisco, and he's a regular in the studio as our strategic advisor. And Francisco, you've been studying CSDDD as well, and you have some ideas about implementation challenges, and you're going to lead us through that now. So Francisco, over to you to do your presentation to address the challenge that organisations will face. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. So, in fact, today I will play a little bit devil's advocate and talk about everything that can go wrong and how to solve those issues. When we are talking about deploying something like CSDDD, on the same, Liudmila, she just make a very good point that some of those things, they may sound familiar to people, but it's not because of that that they are not complex or difficult to deploy. And this is what we will go through. So if we look first at requirements, you need to have two different sets of requirements that relates to the topics and relates to the method. You may already have those in place, in those skills that may be available already on your company. If, for example, you have previously deployed another ISO standard, like 9001 for quality, or something like FSSC 22000 on food safety. But you may not have those, and this is what we would like to stress. In fact, this cycle of continuous improvement and this part of risk assessment is very common when you have to do due diligence, as Liudmila pointed out, but it's also the basis of all ISO standards. That is what FSSC is promoting. ISO standards, if you look at that at the heart, they propose to have a risk approach base and set risk assessment at the center of what you are doing, and then to put a PDCA, plan, do, check, act cycle, continuous improvement cycle. And this is common to all ISO standards. And this is common to all due diligence requirements on all modern laws like CSDDD or any other modern law on due diligence. They all ask the same thing, is be risk-centric and go continuous improvement. That means we are not expecting you to don't have issues. We are expecting you to be ready to manage them, to have the knowledge and the resources in place and the process in place to manage them when they happen, so to mitigate or to avoid those risks. So it's not about not having risk, it's not about being perfect, it's not about having a white hand when you have an audit. It just demonstrates that you are day in, day out doing your due diligence and managing those issues when they happen or trying to avoid them what happen. So related to those requirements, you have things that relate to the subject. So we are talking here, in our case, particularly on the social side, and we will focus on the social side of this CSDDD. So that means that you need to have people that they have field experience on sustainability, on social topics. That can be maybe already people that you have on your supply chain, can be people on your compliance team or on your legal team, on your HR teams. And in fact, this is something that can be of value for you. At the same time, is a topic that complicates CSDDD. Because when we were talking something like quality, you have one quality team and one quality expert that manage this, and you know where to go. When we are talking about food safety, you go to production, and you have the people on the production that they are managing the quality of your products and they are managing safety. When we are talking social, we are talking about a large band of people that can be HR, legal, compliance, can be your executive management on your board for sure, because they are interested on high risk, can be your sustainability team, and your sustainability team can be at corporate level, can be just in production, or can be on the supply chain, it can be on many different places. And therefore, the power to make decisions when we are talking about social topics is split across the company. And that will have an importance when we are talking on governance. Why we need to talk about governance? Because deploying CSDDD is not a one-shot action that you do once. It's about setting and putting in place a process that should go on forever. Because day in, day out, as long as this is in place, you will every year do your cycle of analyzing risk, coping with those risks, and again and again. That means you have to create new roles, you have to attribute new responsibilities, that is changing your governance. You have to put in place what we call a management system. And this management system needs on a permanent way to reshape your organization. Now, how you do that when the decision power and your stakeholder are split across the organization? So that is one challenge, a big challenge when you have to address the governance, is that you will need to align people from many different parts of your organization on one single topic. If you are lucky, maybe you have a sustainability manager that depends from the board or depends from the CEO, and that is horizontal to your company. If it's not the case, you will really need to reshape your organization. And that is, as said, is a big topic that you need to take care. Now, let's talk about the next step. So once you have put your organization aligned, when you have your governance in place, you have created your policies, you have communicated your policies, this is what we will do, then you need to do it. And to do that, you need to put in place, on a sustainable way, a process for managing sustainability, day in, day out, as long as the company is there and this law is there. So that means that you need to have the knowledge on the process side, aside to the knowledge on the topic, to do this plan, do, check, act. You need to have knowledge on your process, you need to have knowledge on risk assessment, you need to have knowledge on setting KPIs, and many of the managing projects, managing change, and all that is necessary to reshape and put in place a new process. So this Plan, Do, Check, Act is something that you may have already in place with another ISA standard, and you can just piggyback with now the social part into that existing structure. And the way to do so is just include in your risk assessment now all the topics that we saw with Liudmila, and we will see also now with Alice, that they are part of the CSDDD requirements. So that means that you are not only looking, if you were looking at food safety, or you were looking at quality, or you were looking at another topic, you are also looking now at social risk. And you include those social risks into risk assessment. Therefore, you will have to decide what are your success criteria for those. You will have to decide what are the KPIs and the measures that you will put in place. We will see that right now. So remember that ISO proposed a very robust continuous improvement process, and this is why in FSSC we like ISO and our norms, they align with ISO, because they are really providing all the hints for a good and robust implementation of a PDCA cycle. You have all that defined on all ISO norms. They are the same. The only thing that changes the topic, but the content, the method, and the process is the same. Now, for doing that, you also need, as we said before, not only the methodology knowledge, but also the subject knowledge. So, for example, when you will go on deciding which measures you will put in place or doing your risk assessment, you need to have a specialist on the topics that knows what are the risks that your company is exposed based on your activities. And that is specific to any company. You will not find two companies that they have the same risk, even on the same industry, because they are not operating the same, they are not doing the same. Therefore, you will need to have this knowledge in-house. You may need to develop it, or you may need to just acquire it as you go. And on risk assessment, that is what we are talking now, is the most important thing. Of the whole cycle of implementation of CSDDD, doing a good identification of your risk, doing a good risk assessment is the most critical thing. If you don't do a good risk assessment, you may go aside to risk where you can fall without knowing that you had that risk, or you can come with risks that they are not true, or they are not as important as you think they were, or they were more important or less important than what you think. So doing a good risk assessment is a question of doing many risk assessments. You may have already a good risk manager in your company or not, but if you don't have it, you better start looking for that, and you need to build this knowledge, because if you don't do a good risk assessment, it's garbage in, garbage out. You will be putting time, energy, and effort on solving issues that they are not really as important as you thought, and maybe going aside to some that they can blow up on your face without you noticing. So the risk assessment is therefore a very important topic. Now, once you have your risk assessment, you need to decide how you will do to minimize your exposure, how you will do to avoid or to mitigate those risks. And for that, you will need to set a certain number of KPIs. Now, again, to put those KPIs in place, you need to have knowledge on the topic. So are we talking about an activity that will really reduce that risk, or this activity will just go through and without any real impact on your risk? For that, you will have to set leading KPIs and lagging KPIs. Leading KPIs are the KPIs that are giving you a forecast of where you are going. Normally, leading KPIs are used through the cycle to tell you if you will achieve your objectives or not. And leading KPIs allow you to make decisions. We are going out of target here. Let's make a change on our plans to go back on target. While lagging KPIs are just showing you the past. You cannot change anything on a lagging KPI, but our lagging KPI is the one that will give you the results of what you have done at the end of the day. and are the ones that you will use for reporting. Because they are the ones that they are telling you, this is where you were a year ago with this measure, and this is where you are now, so this is the improvement that you have made. And that gives us the path for reporting. So you will need also to plan reporting, and when you look for the last year, where there was the first year of implementation of the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, that is the directive that precedes the CSDDD, about half of the people that reported, they were not doing a good report. The report was bad, was not aligned, and was not compliant to the requirements. So you really need to put attention at the end on doing your reporting. And the way to do that is first you start by planning it. You do that on a narrative way. This is the story that we want to tell, and this is the story that we want to tell every year. And this is how we will show that we are improving, because this is what CSDDD is asking you, is keep improving. Once you have that in place, then you decide with anticipation what is your measures for showing that. And those measures needs to be data that you will collect that will be auditable. So there are records that are out of your Plan, Do, Check, Act. By doing this Plan, Do, Check, Act, you will set KPIs, and those KPIs are the ones that will feed your reporting. So you will need to align what you are measuring with what you will report. And once you have done that, then your due diligence is automatically feeding you with the data that you will need to report on this. And at the end, you will have to adapt and learn, because you will find out measures that they are not exactly what they should be. You will find things that you will improve, and year after year, you will improve and you will make a better reporting. So I think that is a review of the 6 topics that I think are the most critical to check and to ensure that you are doing them right. Again, as said, you can be correct on having the required knowledge inside your company, and you may not be. So you need to start thinking this will not happen by coincidence. You will need really, you will need to ensure that you are developing those skills, that you have them in-house if needed, and you will have to do that first year, if possible, ahead, or do it on the first year, knowing that you will have to improve and build all this. Now, if you have already an ISO standard, it will be way easier, because you know already all this. If not, you may need some consultancy, you will need some support to go and deploy the first time. So don't think, as the people that made those reports, that that will happen at the first time right. Is not necessarily the case. Thank you, Colin.
Thank you, Francisco. The reality of it is it takes time to develop it. It's a continual process. So that was Francisco. Thank you, Francisco. Much appreciated. Regular in the studio. And you were building there on the challenge set out by CSDDD about the implementation. And it is one of those challenges where, depending on where you start, it really is the challenge of your implementation journey. And that was the point there, saying many organisations have been working at this for some time in various ways across reporting, disclosures, building management systems. And for other organisations, it'd be a starting block, really. We've got some questions already coming in, which is great to see. Thank you. We'll come to those shortly. And now we're going to turn to Alice Pelfrey. Alice Pelfrey is our Market Development Manager for FSSC 24000. Alice joined us last year, and it's great to have you, Alice. A little bit of a secret here, folks. We're in the studio. It's a cosy environment with Liudmila dialed in. There aren't really hundreds of people watching, so relax and be cool. And please take us through the slides and help the audience here today understand really how FSSC 24000 could be a particular vehicle to help them with these challenges. Over to you, Alice. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Colin. So, FSSC 24000 and CSDDD alignment. So, FSSC 24000 is the right framework to satisfy all CSDDD social requirements. And this is how. So when we look at due diligence, FSSC 24000 provides tools for conducting risk assessment, establishing corrective actions, and monitoring an effectiveness of measurements within the supply chain. So this is very important because this ticks one of the boxes required. When we look at human rights and social responsibility, the scheme focuses on social sustainability by promoting workplace fairness, health and safety, while addressing key labour rights within this topic. So this is where FSSC 24000 focuses on people. We look at the supply chain transparency. Here is where we encourage transparency across the supply chain by implementing a system that monitors suppliers' practices and verifying compliance. When we look at accountability and reporting, here we actually have factual, auditable data that can be, I guess, fed within the reporting, where Francisco mentioned earlier. When we look at continuous improvement, promoting ongoing evaluation and enhancement of social management system to adapt to new risks and opportunities and to new laws and regulations. This is what FSSC 24000 does. So the features of FSSC 24000, we are looking at a social management system that ISO aligned with also ISO aligned principles. It's a risk-based approach. And also we're looking at continuous focus on continuous improvement, commitment to increased efficiency and effectiveness. The actual scheme itself aims at ensuring that organizations provide safe and fair working conditions, meeting business ethics requirements, and apply due diligence in their supply chain management. Also, we look at ensuring supply chain sustainability. Going back at what Francesco mentioned earlier, one of the uniqueness of FSSC 24000 is the alignment with ISO standards. So ISO, whether you have ISO 9001 for quality or ISO 27001 for information security, FSSC 24000 can be integrated because it does have the harmonized structure. However, for those clients of ours who are very familiar with FSSC 22000, again, FSSC 24000 has been designed to be able to integrate social management system according to the FSSC Foundation requirements. So not only we look at integration, but also we look at creating an impact linked with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. As you can see, FSSC 24000 aligns very well with these goals. So I wanted to take a moment and look at the topics of PAS 24000, which is the composition of FSSC 24000. Here we focus, the scheme predominantly focus on human rights, forced labour, child labour, freedom of association, and so on. This is the focus of the scheme. Now, Francisco mentioned, and Liudmila as well mentioned earlier about conducting and looking at risk assessments. These are very strong topics, you know, and also we're looking at some of the examples here I wanted to cover around the different risk assessments that an organisation can look at and how FSSC 24000 can actually support you with these risk assessments. So when we look at point 2, the risk assessment, companies can avoid legal and financial repercussion by identifying. It's all about proactive, so identifying and addressing risks related to labour practices, safe, and ethics. Another very, very important part of this risk assessment, which I wanted to highlight, is point number 5, the supply chain oversight. So certification aims to ensure that suppliers and partners follow the same standards, reducing risks across the supply chain. And this is very important. So again, we talked about some of the KPIs. So every organization, like Francisco mentioned earlier, every company will have their own KPIs based on your organization operations, your circumstances. So these are some of the examples that I wanted to highlight when we look at KPIs. For example, if we look at labor practices, we can look at the compliance with legal working hours and overtime limits. When we look at health and safety, for example, we look at the numbers of incidents, and we look at also like accidents and near misses as well. So there are different health and safety KPIs an organization can actually implement. When we look at ethical practices, we can look at the numbers of ethical violations reported, harassment, discrimination, or bribery. When we look at social impact, we can look at perhaps how a percentage of suppliers or contractors actually follow FSSC 24000 social compliance requirements. That will help you to facilitate this process. When we look at employees' engagement, we can look at the results of employee satisfaction surveys. This is another type of measurement. When we look at supplier management, we can look at the percentage of high-risk suppliers certified or assessed for compliance within social standards. And I guess an organization could specify to a supplier to certify against FSSC 24000. So what does the actual FSSC 24000 scheme looks like? So this is the example of what the scheme looks like. So when you actually do go onto the website fssc.com, you can actually download all the scheme documents for free. So start today, take a look at, evaluate how close you are to starting that journey. But not only, we wanted to support organizations with providing guidance documents to support you through the implementation of the scheme. So we have provided some of the documents, for example, the operational planning and control, social procurement and human rights due diligence, child labour, so the definition and the implementing guidelines. So how to obtain certification? I guess this is where everybody will be asking, well, where do I start? And the perfect answer to your question is to go onto fssc.com, download the scheme documents, so you can download PAS 24000 and FSSC 24000 requirements. Conduct, have a look, familiarise yourself with the scheme, implement the management system, conduct an internal audit so you can see whether there are any gaps or you are actually ready to engage with a certification body that can support you through the FSSC 24000 journey. So it has to be an FSSC 24000 licensed certification body. And from there, you will then commence the typical ISO 3-year cycle. So realistically, once you've received your certification, you will then be able to be part of the FSSC public register, which gives anybody who wants to engage with you the visibility of your commitment towards social sustainability.
Thank you, Alice. Brilliant. Brilliant timing as well. Thank you very much. That leaves us some great time for questions. So quick run through. We've had what CSDDD is, the challenges basically for many organisations. We've had some inputs on implementation. What are the challenges around that? And we've had a potential solution. There'll be people on the call today looking at going, well, it may work, it may not work. But what we're offering here really is a potential solution to a challenge that's coming. And looking at the framework as you've described it, you can go and look at the scheme documents. You could very quickly see that it really helps fill part of the requirements. And that's a real big challenge for many organisations. Now, it's time to take some questions. We've got some questions coming already, which is great news. And what I think I might do is I'm going to direct my first question towards Liudmila, who's been sitting very quietly there in the background while you both presented from the studio. And the question for Liudmila is this, and it's from Mark. Is it possible for CSDDD to affect a subsidiary only and not the parent company? You get that one okay, Liudmila? So is it possible for CSDDD to affect a subsidiary only and not the parent company? Please, could you give us an answer? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Colin. And thank you, Mark, for this question. It's an excellent question. Yes, indeed, it is possible. And this is a scenario that is outlined even in the text of the CSDDD. A parent company outside of the EU may not be in scope because it might not generate enough net turnover specifically in the EU market, but one or multiple of its subsidiaries that are in the EU may have enough employees and may generate global turnover sufficient to be over the compliance threshold, and therefore they will be in scope. Now, that makes it slightly more challenging and interesting for companies like this. For many businesses, subsidiaries closely follow the processes defined at the parent company level, and therefore it will still be the parent company that will be guiding and responsible for implementing due diligence processes. But in other cases, parent companies may be more for umbrella and collection of semi-independent companies that are really defining their own processes and their own policies. And in these cases, CSDDD does outline a process for officially determining that it will be simply that one subsidiary in the EU or several subsidiaries in the EU, but not the parent company that will be responsible for compliance. So it is a very possible scenario.
A great answer. I hope that helps Mark with that one. Let me take the opportunity while you're there to ask you another question. This one's coming from Harold. Harold says, question, are SMEs included in the new rules, CSDDD? So Harold asks, are SMEs included in the new rules? Could you take that one as well, please, Liudmila?
Yes, of course. So as you could see from one of my introductory slides, and as Colin mentioned, the slides will be shared afterwards, the thresholds for compliance at the moment only make very, very large scopes directly in scope. But this doesn't mean that SMEs will not be indirectly affected by CSDDD, particularly if they are tier one suppliers for large organizations that are in scope. Because if that is the case, then those of your customers that are in scope will be going to you and asking the questions. How do you manage those issues within your operations? So the answer is, if you are an SME, then most likely you are not directly in scope, but it is very possible, depending on your business environment and who you work with, that the CSDDD requirements will trickle down to you as well.
A large organisation has to comply, and they're going down their supply chain of risk and saying, you need to help us here with our compliance requirements as well. So they could well specify, for instance, a scheme like FSSC 24000 to help that. Thank you, Liudmila. Let me ask you one more question, please, to Liudmila as well. This one is from Ahmed. How much time do organisations have to comply with CSDDD? So from Ahmed, how much time do organisations have to comply with CSDDD? Liudmila, if you can take that one, then we'll turn to a few with the table again. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for the question. The first wave, the largest companies, are expected to start complying in 2027. So it is 2 years from now. However, as you may be aware, there is a discussion at the EU level about simplifying reporting requirements in the EU, and this is possible to affect CSDDD as well. So unfortunately, I cannot give a clear answer because those omnibus discussions are happening behind the closed doors, and we do not know what's going to come out of those. But it is possible that the compliance period is going to be pushed back. Given that uncertainty, the advice that we always give to companies that we work with is that if you do fall within compliance thresholds, which needs to be determined by your legal counsel or by a legal firm, then it is wise to start preparing for compliance now, because 2027 is going to come much sooner than you think. And as Francisco explained, there are quite a few processes and challenges that need to be overcome to put the right management systems in place.
Brilliant. Thanks, Liudmila. So we've got quite a lot of questions here. We're probably going to struggle to get through all that. You can see me scrolling along the questions here. The answer, I think you've said, is get ready, don't wait. You've got to crack on with this journey. And linked to that is a nice question here from Patrick. I'm going to direct Patrick's question to you, Alice, and is, what are the disadvantages of waiting for retailers or manufacturers to request a social management system? So what are the disadvantages of waiting?
Great question, and thank you very much. I guess it's all about, you've got to look at FSSC 24000 as a proactive approach to social sustainability. Do not wait for it to be asked for. It's a defensive move. You are looking to prepare your business, to find the right resources, to align your operations, and to make social sustainability part of almost your operational DNA. So look at the compliance, like I said earlier, be more proactive, go onto the FSSC 24000, on the FSSC.com website, download the scheme documents, familiarise yourself, because before you know it, 2027 is just around the corner.
I think what you're saying there, Alice, is there's no point in waiting. You're going to have to do it anyway. Crack on. Here's a framework. Go on the website. There's no harm in having a look at the website, is there?
Yes.
Why wait, I think, is the message. Why wait to be told to do it?
Yes.
You're going to have to do it. Crack on, basically, and here's a particular tool to help you. We've got a couple more minutes before we have to start to wrap up. So let me go through a couple of these. So we've got here, Isaac's asking this question. Is FSSC 24000 enough to fulfill all of the CSDDD requirements? And he says, I mean, if a company gets certified to FSSC 24000, is it able to comply with all the regulation? Francisco, let me turn to you for that one. So Isaac's question is it enough to fulfill all the requirements?
Right. So let's go and say, is the case on the social side. So you have two parts into CSDDD. It's about sustainability. And if you look at the ESG approach, it's environmental, social, and governance. So you have an environmental part that is covered by, for example, ISO 14001. So it's just doing into your risk assessment the environmental part of what is the Annex A of ISO 14001, and then FSSC 24000 that is covering the social part. And both are fully covering the requirements, because the basic requirements is being able to manage on a risk-centric base, put in place a policy, so execute that policy, do your risk assessment, and do a plan, do, check, act cycle that will limitate, mitigate, or avoid a certain number of issues. That is what is asked, and then report about it. That is at the core of what CSDDD is asking, and all ISO norms do that and more, because they integrate, based on experience, a certain number of other things that ensure that you are on a robust way implementing, on a sustainable way implementing this life cycle. For example, it's asking you to manage training. It's asking you to manage communications. There are things, that, internal communication, there are things that they are not explicitly into CSDDD, but we know by experience, and ISO adds that to the norms, because we know by experience that those help enforcing that your management system is working well. So it's ensuring that you have the right resources, that you have those resources are trained, that your intentions of your company are communicated, that training is provided. So there is a lot of topics aside that help cement and ensure that your management system is solid in place.
Thank you very much, Francisco. Excellent answer. I think we're going to do two very quick ones. There's one here from George, and I'm sorry I'm not going to be able to get through all these. We've got questions from Laurent, Mohammed, Sueli, but let's go for this one from George. There's been a lot of talk, George says here, about organisations rolling back on their DEI policies, particularly over the last couple of weeks. And George says, where does this leave regulations like CSDDD? A very key issue I heard only this morning about a large organisation in America rolling back on DEI policies instance. Francisco, let me turn to you for that. What do you think of this? Where does this leave CSDDD? Where does it leave a scheme like the adoption of FSSC 24000?
Right.
Thank
okay.
you, George. Great question.
I don't have a crystal ball, and I don't know what is going out of this omnibus review that will come at the end of the month. I think we have maybe 4 years that they will be tough ahead, and later who knows what happened. But there is I don't think that there is a way that does go down. Probably this omnibus will water down and decaffeinate CSDDD and CSRD, and there will be more delays to implementation. But I just read yesterday a new article from a finance government saying that the idea that CSDDD and others, they will reduce the productivity and they will reduce the capacity of companies to be competitive is wrong. And you have also now the Chinese government that is deploying a new norm on sustainability, and this is quite new. It's CSDDs, Chinese Sustainability Due Diligence. So all that is indications of people taking the room of others that disappeared. And I think that this void will be filled one way or another.
Thank you, Francisco. It's a great question there from George. So many great questions. We've only got less than 2 minutes to wrap up. So I'd like to now say thank you very much to Liudmila for attending today, dialing in from the UK. Really great introduction to CSDDD. I'm sure you're inundated with questions. In the studio here, we have Francisco Estive. Thank you very much, as always, for dropping in. And Alice Palfrey on FSSC 24000. As you know, we have a regular programme of FSSC webinars, which we deliver here live from the Netherlands, our home globally. And the next one coming up is on FSSC 22000. We'd like to encourage you all to get in touch with our market representatives around the world if you want to have further questions. And after today, we can see our best to use these questions you've had to inform further webinars. It's been great having the questions today, great having you in the studio, great Liudmila dialing in. We really hope you understand CSDDD's coming, whatever happens, whatever organisations do rolling back, it's a big piece of work to do for 2027. One piece of that jigsaw can be FSSC 24000. And thank you for sharing how to do that today. And with that, we'd like to thank you for your time today. And we look forward to seeing you next one. And thank you very much all for participating. We've really enjoyed the time today. It's gone so quick, hasn't it? It's already 1 hour. Thank you.